Normally, games don't make me cry. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just cold and callous and have to watch over Gotham every night. However, recently I was playing Roblox, and I came across a game called Jim's Computer. It's a horror game following a Robloxian named Jim who just got a computer. Sounds fine, right? Well, some strange things start to happen around his town. Robloxians are going missing, the chemical refinery has a leak, the military gets involved, etc. And he gets paranoid from it all, eventually leading to his own demise. This game has no jump scares, no monsters, no gore, or anything like that, because obviously it's on Roblox. So, it was still rather jarring for a Roblox game, which made fans start to speculate about what was actually happening in the game. Pretty much the fandom is divided into two groups. Ones who believe that something was going to in fact happen to Jim, and that everything around him was leading up to that. And the other ones that believe that Jim was possibly schizophrenic. That's the main one I see is schizophrenia, but I've seen some others. However, I personally don't believe that Jim was schizophrenic. I think Jim's computer could be interpreted as a story about like OCD, whether intended or not by the developer. Now, why do I believe that? Mostly from a personal experience, but a bit more on that later. For now, let's actually look into what OCD is, because I feel like that's important for the rest of the video going forward. According to the Cleveland Clinic, obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, is a mental condition in which you have frequent unwanted thoughts that cause you to perform repetitive behaviors. Treatment for OCD usually involves psychotherapy and medication. The sooner OCD is diagnosed and treated, the better the outlook. Think about that last part, though. Because in Jim's computer, it doesn't take place on one day. It's actually multiple days and nights. So I believe it's up to 5, if I'm remembering correctly. So you have 5 nights, eventually just showing all of Jim's descent, so to speak. Now, a lot of you have seen media portrayal of the illness as like somebody constantly washing their hands or counting objects or checking doorknobs, things like that. However, it's more of a spectrum in my experience. I've seen and heard and been through really weird repetitions through my life. For example, having to walk with my back against the wall because something was gonna come at me. Yeah, I was pretty much living through 50-20 mode of Ultimate Custom most of my life. But some people can have things like cleaning OCD. I feel like the majority of people, like in other situations, are different from each other in that regard. But what makes them have OCD is the fact that they follow that pattern. You have an upsetting thought, you have the action that remedies the thought for just a moment, and then you have the feeling of comfort or safety again. And it's a very vicious cycle, just round and round and round. And eventually that's what causes doctors to take a look and be like, oh, well, you might have OCD. That is just OCD. A not so harmful way OCD can manifest is like, for example, checking your oven before you leave the house multiple times before you leave the house. Seems harmless, but again, still follows the pattern. So, what does this have to do with Jim? On the first night of the game, before the chemical refinery spilled or any of the scary stuff happened, he wakes up in the middle of the night. And he goes to check his closets, and then he goes back to bed. So, that kind of tells me this has always been a problem for Jim. Who knows, I mean, really how long we've seen him do that. At least there's 2 nights that we have in the game that kind of tell us that he's kind of always been like this. Because, yeah, don't get me wrong, on the second night, I believe it starts talking about Robloxians going missing, but it wasn't anything too big. It was just a couple of cold cases. So, he doesn't really have too much to fear at the moment. It's not like it's been, like, repeated a lot. So, a thing about OCD is Sorry, I messed that one up. The thing about OCD is that stress really takes a big part in it. For example, like, personally, I've noticed the most I've ever struggled was through really, like, hard family, like, tough times and whatnot. That's whenever my worst thoughts came through. And so, in my opinion, when Jim reads more and more about the Robloxians going missing, and he gets a message to prepare, stay hidden, the military comes, etc., his obsessive thoughts snowball into something bigger, something uncontrollable. And when you give in to that worrying thought, it only consumes you more. This could be seen in the night where Jim heard footsteps and said to himself, "There's somebody inside my house." That's kind of if you interpret the scene as a possible hallucination. So it depends on what you believe in that regard, but Jim also gives into the worrying thought about getting food, water, a medkit, boards, and the gun. He's kind of just adding a little piece by piece, into the snowball that eventually leads to his demise. On the final night, everything just hits him kind of all at once. He couldn't take the fear anymore, leading him to turn the gun onto himself. Whatever he thought was outside of that door was so frightening, he couldn't take it anymore. And this is where I cried. I'll admit I cried for days after the fact. I still tear up every time I hear it. I still tear up whenever I play the game again to record for this video. It was just like looking in the mirror of what could possibly have happened in my worst moments. And a part of me really wishes that the developers had an ending where you can choose for Jim to put down the gun and open the door and face whatever is out there. But unfortunately, a lot of the time, that's not the realistic ending for people with OCD. OCD is so trivialized and misdiagnosed. People who don't have it don't often get help. Which leads to moments like Jim's where the fear and isolation gets too much to the point where they take their own lives. In fact, people who have OCD are 10 times more likely to commit suicide than the average person. But what is intriguing about that, though, not the suicide part, but what's intriguing about that, though, is when he does do it, the game ends, and you get a trophy called Escape. This could be taken in a lot of ways. It could be Jim escaping the situation, escaping what could have happened to him. However, I think it's more of him finally escaping the cycle that deeply took a hold of his life. He was free from his torment in the worst possible way. Also, to add, I don't mind people believing that he's schizophrenic or anything, because I know how some of these people act whenever it comes to their, theories and whatnot. Personally, I don't mind it. I'm not gonna fight anybody on it. In fact, sometimes OCD and schizophrenia get misdiagnosed for each other. I was almost diagnosed as schizotypical by my therapist before she realized that I was following the OCD cycle. Somebody who is diagnosed with OCD can have schizophrenia, and somebody who has schizophrenia could have OCD, or it could be a mixture of both. Vice versa, whichever way. However, the main reason why I'm ruling it out is because, one, I'm projecting, and two, because of his compulsions and him following the OCD cycle beforehand, and, the fact that we don't really see, he doesn't really show any other signs of schizophrenia other than hallucinations. Or at least that's in my opinion, of course. And I'll also admit, there's some flaws. My theory really banks on the fact that what's happening to him isn't actually correlated to him in particular. While I personally believe that while yes, people were going missing, the chemical plant spilled, somebody was psyching him out on the internet, that was all actually happening, I think Jim himself wasn't going to be attacked or turn into a monster or anything of the sort. In fact, maybe the pounding on the door was the military trying to get him to evacuate his house. But at the end of the day, that is just a developer's secret, and we may never know. Hey, so, I'm sorry for such a serious first video. Trust me, I have a lot more lighthearted ones in the future. Like, I've been wanting to make a video, this is probably gonna be my second video, But I've been wanting to make a video about how Postal 1 dude is the most morally correct one out of the bunch. Next I'm thinking about making a video about what I would do to make Roblox a better platform in my opinion. Um, Maybe down the line I want to do some video game challenges, horror movie characters I could beat, which of course is inspired by Degenerosity. His videos are really funny on that. I got kind of inspired by it. And I was also thinking about making my own little series called Does It Still Hold Up? Where we'll dive into games older than 10 years to see if it still holds up to the modern age. And hopefully I'll do some Let's Plays with that too, and by then I'll probably get a better PC and a better mic and whatnot. Right now I'm filming this outside of my car on my shitty phone mic, so that's why it's so bad. And I'm also really nervous and kind of excited to finally be making videos and putting myself out there. So if you want to see more, then, hit subscribe. Sounds stereotypical. And if you have any ideas, comments, suggestions on future videos or, anything of the sort, then comment down below. And I'll catch you later.